Good morning. The Los Angeles Board of Harbor Commissioners are now in open session for their regular meeting today, Thursday, June 4th, 2020. Item A is roll call. President Lee.
Here.
Vice President Renwick. Commissioner Middleton.
Here.
Commissioner Moreno-Linares.
Here.
Commissioner Perosi.
Here.
We have confirmed our quorum. Moving on to item B with Executive Director remarks with Gene Soroka.
Good morning, Madam President, commissioners, members of the public, distinguished guests, and Harbor Department staff. I begin my remarks this morning with deep sadness and a very heavy heart. On Memorial Day last week, we witnessed the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer, with seemingly at least 3 other officers standing by with no recourse to assist. All 4 of those former police officers have been met with high crimes from the Minnesota State Attorney and the District Attorney from Hennepin County. This senseless tragedy once again reminds us that racism exists in our country after all these years. In America, we preserve the right through the First Amendment to speak what's on our minds, to demonstrate, to protest, to march, to sing, laugh, pray, or cry as we wish. And I think over the last 10 days, many of us have done all of the above, or at least some. But we at some point, and this cuts very deep, need to unify. We need unity in this country, in our great land, to aspire to be the America that we all want and all need desperately. I take the responsibilities of executive director at the world's greatest port here in Los Angeles very seriously. And as part of that responsibility, I have under our care the Port Police Bureau that is managed by our very top shelf Chief Tom Gazy. We employ a community policing strategy every day because it is so important to our neighbors, our business partners, and our colleagues right here at work, and those that we deal with all around the world. And I am confident every day that the women and men, both sworn and civilian, uphold those privileges to serve our community in the proper way. And I am extremely confident in that leadership that Chief Gazy exhibits every single day. And with that, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Chief Gazy to give us a public safety update here this morning.
Thank you, Gene. Honorable Commission, President Lee, good morning. A week ago, Memorial Day, we witnessed deplorable and reprehensible conduct on the part of Minneapolis police officers. Know that what we witnessed as Americans nationally is not in keeping with the great traditions of law enforcement, nor is it certainly of the Los Angeles Port Police, nor of our closest allied partners. In discussing this with our police officers in a variety of roll call settings, they all found it as deplorable as I did. In an open letter to our police department following this tragic and senseless event, I pointed out to our folks how inappropriate it was for the officer, the arresting officer, to have conducted himself in such a way. And I suggested that the other officers that acted and failed to intervene in this conduct were complicit. 2 days ago, you're aware that subsequent charges have been filed against those other officers, including aggravated assault and accessory to murder and a variety of others, and appropriately so. Know this, that the Los Angeles Port Police has a history that goes back to 1911. Long before community-based policing was a philosophy as it is today, nonetheless, the reputation of the Los Angeles Port Police was to attend to the port complex, the water side, the land side, with great sensitivity, dignity, and care for the port complex. As the department has evolved over many years, it now reaches into properties and areas of port responsibility in Wilmington, Harbor City, and San Pedro. The reputation that we maintain, and I'm proud that we have, is that we're a very sensitive, caring, thoughtful, and discreet police department, which you have my full commitment that we will continue to be with increased sensitivity. Now, it doesn't mean that we rest on our laurels or take for granted the successes of the past. We always have to evaluate ourselves, our conduct, and my commitment to you is that we will do just that. Over the last several days, our police officers, community resource officers, and our command staff have met with a variety of businesses in and about the complex, the fish market, restaurants, breweries, in and about San Pedro, Crafted, 22nd Street Landing, and others, to ensure that as they were transitioning out of the COVID period and restrictions began to lift, that they would successfully engage their business activities. As you know, this is a significant and understandable setback, but nonetheless, we will do all we can to ensure that those businesses come back online safely, successfully, and serve the area of the Port of Los Angeles. As well, our police officers under mutual aid agreements have been detailed out in and around Los Angeles to assist the Los Angeles Police Department in restoring order, upholding the First Amendment rights of those that would protest peacefully. Most notably, our officers were detailed to Los Angeles Fire Department stations to escort LAFD personnel to responding to calls for fires, rescues, accidents, and medical aids. In some cases, even escorting the rescue ambulances to hospitals to ensure the care of those affected in Los Angeles, that they would receive the care necessary for those incidents. And they've done that with great nobility and great sensitivity and thoughtfulness. And we will continue to do that as long as that is necessary. In some cases, we were deployed to areas of Los Angeles where there was unrest to ensure the First Amendment rights of those that were protesting and demonstrating their frustration with the current climate was allowed to occur without being impeded. With the utmost dignity, the utmost thoughtfulness, and the utmost care. I'm pleased to report there's been no damage to any of our facilities in and about the port complex. None of our personnel have been injured. No Harbor Department personnel have encountered problems or issues, and we've ensured that if it was necessary to leave early in the day, that we accommodated those things based on what was happening in and around Los Angeles with the approval of the general manager, Gene Soroka, to release our employees to ensure that they were able to travel home safely. We will continue to look at ways we can improve our relations in the Port of Los Angeles at all levels. And we will continue to police the Port of Los Angeles with great dignity, with an institution that was established honorably in 1911. Thank you.
And I think it's easy to see why we all admire Chief Gacy so much. In the most critical of times, how the best rise to the top. Thank you, Chief. Continuing with my report this morning. We have 7 vessels in port today, 5 of the container type, including 2 that are anchored, 1 tanker barge, and 1 bulk vessel working today at the Port of Los Angeles. There are 15 tankers that are at anchor in and around the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach today. 1 is designated for the Port of Los Angeles, 8 for Long Beach, 3 for Chevron up in El Segundo, and 3 still awaiting instructions. From a terminal perspective, all of our terminals are open. Normal operations are taking place. Some gates are closed for daytime due to volume, but we see continuing good flow of container volume moving through all of our facilities with much room to grow on our tarmacs. As we've talked about in many meetings previously, there have been a number of canceled sailings throughout the year, beginning post-Lunar New Year in the month of February, due to the drop in demand for goods and services here in the United States based on the emergency orders throughout the country. As a final tally in the month of May, we had 15 additional blank sailings that roughly would equate to 300,000 TEUs. In the month of June, we're estimating 5 canceled sailings, or void sailings as they call them in the industry, for about 175,000 TEUs. But please know that that number continues to drop as volume is picking up ever so slightly with orders in Asia. And the early estimates for July, as this remains to be a very fluid situation, is that there'll be about 5 canceled sailings in that month to come as well. But we'll report to you on a regular basis as companies are making decisions nearly on a daily basis as to how capacity matches up with demand for sailings. On average, we traditionally have 85 calls a month, and in the month just concluded in May, we had 60 vessels call in Los Angeles. So you can see quite clearly the impact that the closure of the U.S. economy has had on international shipping and the cargo that is normally destined for the Port of LA. Every Wednesday, our labor statistics from the PMA and the ILWU come out. And what we have seen is that week on week, labor shifts are down a little bit more than 6%, tallying in this last week 30,851 shifts. And to put this in perspective, year over year, our shift work is down about 19%. And compared to the 3-year plus average, we are down approximately 22% year on year compared to that 3+ year average. 28%. 28% down over the running 3-year average. We also keep very close watch on the COVID-19 statistics throughout Los Angeles County as part of the work that we are doing with Logistics Victory Los Angeles. And as you can see from the slides, we have more than 58,000 COVID-19 cases that have been diagnosed in Los Angeles County. We are very sadly approaching 2,500 fatalities due to the virus. With 99% of our hospitals reporting, we have 1,344 COVID-19 related patients admitted in our hospitals countywide. The overall hospital beds, as I've reported before, number approximately 3,800, and we have a little more than 1,500 beds open. That, by qualified medical experts, is a good inventory of open beds. ICU beds, which tally 900 countywide, have 240 open. That's a little bit lower than we have been reporting at the past several board meetings. And the total ventilator inventory looks to be very good, with more than 1,140 available out of the total 1,500 that we normally keep in supply in Los Angeles County. So all of those key metrics appear to be favorable for us at this point in time, but the medical experts I refer to watch this hourly. For Logistics Victory Los Angeles updates this week, it was a banner week. Beginning on May 28th, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, the general manager of our General Services Department, Tony Royster, and I welcomed the very first delivery of our large 24 million N95 masks that were purchased by the city from the Honeywell Corporation, designated for doctors, nurses, technicians, firefighters, and other first responders here and around the Port of Los Angeles. These N95 masks will help ensure healthcare workers get the equipment they need to save lives and protect their own. Just 30 days before, on April 28th, Mayor Garcetti announced this historic order of the 24 million N95 masks, which were being manufactured just 6 hours down the 10 freeway in Phoenix, Arizona. The agreement with Honeywell was negotiated through the city's General Services Department and our great team here at Love LA. And as I've told the story before, it was our own Aveen Sharma who was tracking down leads around the world. And then when we got in touch with the Honeywell folks, Erica Calhoun, David Libatique, and I got to know these people very well, worked through their strategic plan on the development and manufacture of the product, and within 7 days came to an agreement on this historic contract between Honeywell and the city. Love LA is very pleased to bring these masks to our frontline healthcare workers. The milestone procurement, coupled with our work to fortify and expedite the region's medical supply chain, is showing progress in Love LA's mission to build the personal protective equipment stockpiles and help medical organizations in this critical time of need for their supplies. The masks were purchased at a competitive market rate and will be delivered at cost, no markup, no margin, to our hospitals and healthcare providers throughout Los Angeles. With this first shipment of 100,000 masks, Love LA will distribute 90,000 N95 masks to hospitals and healthcare workers at cost, and 10,000 were given right off the bat to our fire department personnel and first responders. Shipments of the N95s will continue to scale up over the coming months, reaching 1.2 million masks per month by November of this year. On that same day, Ed Aldridge, a longtime friend in the industry, joined us as the president of CMA CGM North America and concurrently that of APL throughout the geography. CMA is a leader in shipping and logistics worldwide, and here in the United States, they represent the largest carrier that calls our shores. That great company based in Marseille, France, donated 200,000 FFP2P masks that are European certified and delivered them to Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti on behalf and for the people of Los Angeles. Now Chairman and CEO Rodolphe Sade, along with his sister Tanya Sade-Zini of the CMA Group, donated these masks to help us all fight the COVID-19 pandemic. And you may remember some years ago when Rodolphe and Tanya's father, the late Jacques Sade, along with Fareed Salim, Olivier Nouvois, and so many other CMA executives came to Los Angeles wanting to expand their business here in Southern California, and at the same time asked what they could do for the people of LA. And I think this is a great demonstration of their commitment here in Los Angeles. We have a short video now just to show you a little bit more about this generous offering from our friends at CMA.
Today, we're so excited to be with CMA CGM for a donation of 200,000 European standard FFP2 respirator face masks because it reflects the power of partnerships. And I want to thank CMA CGM. This has really been a friend and a collaborator to so much of the great work we're doing in the ports of Los Angeles and our region.
Mayor, you'll remember hosting founder and then chairman and CEO, the late Jacques Sade, in your office to help solidify this long-term partnership and relationship. And Mr. Sade came to Los Angeles and asked us, how could we do more business here? And the mayor was ever so kind as to bring Mr. Sade, Fareed Salim, and so many others in to talk about what we were going to do. And they said that they wanted to get involved in the city of Los Angeles, and we're seeing that here today. That involvement really starts at the top with now chairman and son Rodolphe Sade, his sister Tanya Sade-Zini, the executive officer, and so many others that have contributed to this great relationship with our city and port.
We are proud to provide these masks as a gesture of our dedication to the great people of Los Angeles and to our partners at the Port of LA, who do an absolutely outstanding job in working our vessels every week. As the largest ocean carrier today, calling the Port of Los Angeles, and our nation's largest ocean carrier, we are absolutely committed to help the U.S. recover from the effects of this pandemic. CMA CGM today is harnessing the best of our organization, including CEVA Logistics and American President Lines, to deliver differentiated ocean services and customized end-to-end logistics solutions for the vital products that need to be delivered faster, safely, and always economically and environmentally in a reliable manner. We will always be there for you. You have always been there for us, and we look forward to many years of close friendship and cooperation.
And thanks to our graphics and communications team for compiling that great footage, the B-roll, and getting all of those folks together to put out, again, another studio quality video here at the Port of Los Angeles. Thank you. Shifting now to the Public Access Investment Plan here at the Port of Los Angeles. I'd like to share a quick update on the Port's Public Access Plan and our continued commitment to the Los Angeles waterfront. Major public access infrastructure projects will continue to move forward in the next fiscal year, with the port expected to be in construction on various projects valued at $121 million and additional projects valued at $58 million that are currently in the design phase. The Port's unwavering commitment to investing in the LA waterfront infrastructure has never been more evident than now, with more than $179 million worth of projects in the delivery pipeline, including the long-standing commitment to connect Wilmington to its historic waterfront. Future investment through the Public Access Plan is directly tied to actual and projected annual operating income results from the year 2015 through 2025, with the total estimated funding for new projects prior to the COVID-19 pandemic based on the Port's continuing economic activity. As we all know, the Port's business and financial outlook has been significantly affected by the current economic situation, and there is likely no way to project when cargo volume and port revenues will fully recover from this economic shock. But I remain confident that our business will recover over time. We'll have much work ahead of us, and the short term presents significant uncertainty. Therefore, recommendations and decisions on all second-round project ideas for the Public Access Investment Plan will need to be delayed for just a few months as the economic recovery takes shape. But that doesn't mean we'll stop talking and gathering ideas. Port staff and I will remain in close contact with all stakeholders through frequent and consistent engagement. If anyone has questions, suggestions, or advice for us, please reach out to me directly, Mike Galvin, or other staff here at the Harbor Department. We're always open to keep dialogue going and finding ways to improve our process. And lastly, an update on our business meetings. We've had so many, and I can recall from the last few video meetings that we've listed just about everything we've done. I've tried to narrow it down through Erica's recommendation to a few key meetings, just to give you a flavor of how busy we've been here at the Harbor Department. With a historic meeting of West Coast Competitiveness Partners. As you may recall, I led an effort to put together a West Coast group of business interests to answer the question of competitiveness. And it started with the 5 West Coast ports of Seattle and Tacoma that are now the Northwest Seaport Alliance, Oakland, Long Beach, and Los Angeles. We were also able to bring in the Pacific Maritime Association, the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association, Longshore Labor, and for the first time with all of those other folks, the 2 Western railroads. So we had a kickoff meeting just 10 days ago with all the groups invited. And you'll see from our list of people, every port director was represented. Jim McKenna from the PMA, John McLaurin from the PMSA, Kenny Rocker from the UP Railroad, and Tom Williams from the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. We talked a lot about what we're trying to do from a competitiveness standpoint, from our operations and efficiencies to our financial investments, whether they be in great infrastructure, digitization, or transactional needs to make sure our costs are competitive, through our political and regulatory framework. This group will continue to meet on a regular basis, and I'd like to give special thanks to David Libatique, Aveen Sharma, Mike DiBernardo, and Eric Karras for all the work they're doing in front and behind the scenes on this all-important competitiveness effort. On a global scale, Chainport reignited their discussions on the global impacts of COVID-19 Wednesday morning, May 27th, via Microsoft Teams. The topics discussed are how we as ports and global members of the economy ready to facilitate fast recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic by assessing what we can do as ports in post-crisis developments. This was the second video call of this team since we were all limited to our home bases. And on this one, we had 21 participants, including folks like Jens Meyer from Hamburg and so many others. On Thursday afternoon, May 28th, via Zoom, thanks to Amy Grad, we put together a discussion with the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce and had a virtual chat. Our own Commissioner Moreno Linares was in attendance as well. We had more than 60 participants and talked about a wide range of subjects, including our port's work on transportation, waterfront activity, and our efforts of environmental strategy. That followed on Tuesday morning, June 2nd, by meeting with governing board member of the South Coast Air Quality District member, Larry McCallum. We talked about some of the very same subjects on how we are trying to promote our next phase of the Clean Truck Program, our second iteration of the Clean Air Action Plan, and what we are doing to pull together a manufacturing summit of those folks in the heavy truck industry, as well as the marine terminal equipment industries. I was joined on that call by Chris Cannon, Jennifer Cohen, and Eric Martell, along with David Libatique. Tuesday afternoon of this past week, we met with ILW local presidents from 13, 63, and 94. In attendance were Ramon Ponce de Leon, recently elected to Local 13, Mike Perdue from Local 63, and the Marine clerks and the foremen were represented, by, as always, by Danny Miranda. Joining me were David Libatique, Mike DiBernardo, and Naveen Sharma to talk about the overall competitiveness strategy, as well as our outlook on China shipping and the regulatory environment going down line. Yesterday, we had a radio interview with Sirius XM reporter on transport topics, Dan Rowan, and talked about an entire group of issues, including trade policy, COVID-19, and how we are going to continue to move forward in reinventing ourselves as we try to help the American manufacturer, automotive groups, their tiered suppliers, and the American farmer get back on their feet and reintroduce them to their overseas markets. In the afternoon, one of our close friends, Japan Consul General Akira Muto, and I had a Zoom call. We thank them for connecting us with Toyota Motor Manufacturing and others who are bringing donations to us right now. And we're also looking at other opportunities for the purchase of PPEs by Japan-based companies and their manufacturing capabilities. We further talked about what Toyota is doing right here at the Port of Los Angeles to demonstrate the hydrogen fuel cell electric motor in top handlers and other materials handling equipment on our terminals. And that, in addition to their heavy-duty truck demonstration through the Zanziv grant on our shore-to-store project here in Southern California. And that concludes my remarks for this morning.
Thank you very much, Gene, for that heartfelt and very important update. Thank you also to the chief, and bravo to CMA CGM for their commitment to Los Angeles and their donation as well. It has been a very, very difficult week for all of us here in Los Angeles, beginning with the tragedy of witnessing the horrific murder of George Floyd. But I also feel like the progress we've made in the last couple of days, the peaceful protests, the enormous gathering of citizens at City Hall and across our entire city has been so heartening, so joyful in many ways, and so important. And I feel especially that, you know, for those of us, even American-born citizens who are acutely reminded on a daily basis that racism is very, very pervasive, even in a city such as ours, we look forward to aiding however we can in this progress and have never doubted the integrity and love and passion of the LA Port Police in assisting the neighborhood surrounding the port in that effort. So I really, really appreciate that very much. We have a couple of questions. Commissioner Middleton, please. Let me see if I can help you.
Got it.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just get this going for a second here. Great. As always, many thanks to Mr. Soroka for a wonderful report, and also for your remarks, President Lee, a great beginning to our meeting. I had one comment and then two questions for Mr. Soroka. I really agreed with his heartfelt comments. They were spot on. I believe that the call for unity is totally appropriate. In addition, change, social, legal, but mainly economic. And that's what's going to move us forward. So those were great remarks. The two questions that I had for you, this is recent, and I wanted to see if I correctly understood it. It was an article in FreightWaves on June 2nd, and it talked about comments that were made by President Trump about China that were fairly inflammatory, and they resulted in the statement that China was suspending orders for soybeans, pork, cotton, and corn. And I know that we're hoping that we will increase our agricultural exports. Is this true? Is this just another soundbite coming from China this time instead of the president? Or is it really going to happen? That's question one.
Yeah, part of what was called the Phase 1 trade deal with China from the administration in Washington called for an elevated dollar value of exports from the United States to China over a period of time. And unfortunately, since February, and my information is not up to this day, but since February, we should have had about $23 billion worth of American exports on their way to China by this time. And we're only about $9 billion into that transaction. And there are many reasons for that. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has limited the intake on the China side and the ability for production in some cases, especially in the manufacturing sector, to deliver all those goods. But the work ahead of us is so very important that the two largest economies in the world have good trade relations. And as we have seen around the country, we are dumping milk, slaughtering livestock, and allowing perishable commodities to go bad. This must be corrected by re-emerging our economy, and we stand prepared, as I mentioned earlier, to help the American farmer, manufacturer, the automotive industry, their tiered suppliers, and many, many other exporters, including those here in the Central Valley of California, the Inland Empire, and Los Angeles County, which still proudly boasts the largest number of employees in the manufacturing sector nationwide at nearly 390,000 steady state employees. Now, with 41 million plus Americans out of work today, that industry and sector for us is very uneven, but we will do all we can to help prop them back up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Soroka. And then my last question is, I also read that there is a new ZIM service that started between Asia and Southern California. And I was wondering if a decision has been made as to where those ships will call.
Yes, a decision has been made, and they'll be going to West Basin Container Terminal here at the Port of Los Angeles.
Excellent.
We've worked very closely with Ports America Group President Peter Levesque and President of ZIM North America, George Goldman, both of whom have been friends for a long time in this industry. And we are very proud to see, we still got a few things to button up, but we're very proud to see that they'll be putting in an expedited service from South China directly to Los Angeles in an effort to help our economy recover.
Thank you. No other questions for you. But again, I join with President Lee in your comments in thanking the Port Police for the exceptional job they're doing. Continue with this great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Commissioner Perosi, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say, again, just to echo all the comments that were made about what we're going through as a country. I wanted to thank the chief as well. I was in touch with him a lot this week. See how things are going, making my way around San Pedro. And we saw a great police presence from LAPD and the Port Police in the last, 48 hours. I'm sure they were there the whole time and been supporting other areas as well. So, coming together, it's unfortunate that this occurred in the death of George Floyd, but you guys have all said it right. It was horrible. There's a lot of work to do going forward. It starts with each one of us each and every day. And as a port, we need to continue to keep our eye on the ball as well in this area of unity, even with our town, the areas we serve, and each other. And I know there's a lot of great folks out there, and I think this is going to take us all to the next level. There's just so much to do, but thank you again for your comments. Thanks, Chief, for the support and everything that the port's been doing to keep us secure and safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I'll turn it back over to Amber, please.
Thank you, President Lee. Next up, item C, comments from the public on non-agenda items. Comments have not been submitted for this meeting at this time. Item D, reports of the neighborhood council representatives. No motions have been filed as far as we know at this time for item D. Moving on to item E, reports of the commissioners.
Thank you. I have nothing to report. Commissioner Moreno-Linares?
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Perosi?
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Middleton?
I was appointed to the LA County Economic Resiliency Task Force. It's quite a mouthful, the Commodities and Goods Movement Committee. We met on May 22nd by phone, of course, and May 29th. And I want to extend my thanks not only to our executive director, his terrific video reports, commission reports, gave me lots of material in which to participate. And additionally, I was able to connect with David Lovatique, and he had terrific input, so I will keep you posted. That's all I have to report, those two meetings. Thank you.
Thank you and congratulations.
Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on to board committee reports. There are none to report for this meeting. Item G, approval of the minutes for both the regular meeting of May 21st, 2020 and the special joint boards meeting for March 9th, 2020.
I hope everyone had a chance to review the minutes. If there are no comments or any questions, I would take a motion to approve both, and we will be moving into a format going forward of a roll call vote on every item for Brown Act purposes.
Move to approve?
Second.
Second.
Moreno Linares, Middleton. Sorry, Anthony. Amber.
Commissioner Perosi,
I'll give you another one later.
That's okay. Yes.
Commissioner Moreno Linares,
Yes.
Commissioner Middleton,
Yes.
President Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. Next up, item H, presentations. There are none for this meeting. And item A, level 1 coastal development permit. There are none for this meeting as well. Moving forward to item J for the board reports of the executive director, consent items number 1 through 7. There are 2 administrative technical corrections to make, one for item 1 and the other for item 2. Item 1, there's a small provision that needed to be corrected in the revocable permit, which states that the proposed revocable permit supersedes prior permit. It was inadvertently deleted out of that permit, which has since been corrected and re-signed by the tenant at this time. So that has been corrected. And for item 2, recommendation number 4, Charter Section 255 was listed. That's an administrative typo. That should read Charter Section 373. If there are no further questions, I will read items 1 through 5 and number 7 into the record for a collective vote. Hearing none, item 1 is a resolution to approve revocable permit number 20-10 with Fisherman's Pride Processing, Inc. Item 2 is a resolution to approve the transfer of jurisdiction and control of the portion remnant railroad right-of-way from the City of Los Angeles Harbor Department to the General Services Department. Item 3 is a resolution to approve change order number 3, adjustment bid item number 15 with contractor Griffith Company for San Pedro Waterfront Berth 74 through 84 Promenade and Town Square project, for specification number 286, 2807 and contract number 2317. Item 4 is a resolution to approve agreements for as-needed professional writing and editing services with Dorothea Demir Kovacevic, DBA DDK Communications, Full Vision Productions LLC, Natalie L. Shore Peterson, and Reservoir LLC. Item 5 is a resolution for the memoranda of understanding formalizing the terms under which instructors are provided to the Regional Maritime Law Enforcement Training Center between the Los Angeles Police Department, the City of Long Beach, the County of Los Angeles, the County of Orange, and the County of San Bernardino Sheriff's Departments, the San Diego Police Department, and the Los Angeles Harbor Department. And item 7 is a resolution for the ratification of change to agreement between the City of Los Angeles Harbor Department and Occupational Health Centers of California for occupational medical services.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Anthony's got it.
Perosi, I'll take that as a second for Commissioner Middleton.
Okay.
Okay, for our roll call vote, Commissioner Perosi,
Yes.
Commissioner Moreno Linares,
Yes.
Commissioner Middleton,
Yes.
President Lee.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to item 6. Commissioner Perosi, you are recused from this item. We're going to say goodbye
Okay.
for just a moment. Item 6 is a resolution for the approval of State of California Network 3 authorization to order services for an 18-month extension from AT&T Corporation under agreement number 15-3333A.
Any questions on this item? Hearing none, may I please have a motion and a second to approve?
Motion to approve?
Second.
Moreno, Linares, Middleton.
Roll call vote. That would be Commissioner Moreno-Linares,
Yes.
Commissioner Middleton,
Yes.
and President Lee.
Yes. Commissioner Perosi can come back, please.
Okay,
There we go.
And for our regular agenda for item 8 and 9, item 8 is a resolution for the adoption of proposed fiscal year 2020-21 annual budget. And with us would be Marla Blevins.
Thank you, Amber. Good morning, President Lee, Commissioners. I believe our General Manager, Gene Soroka, had some opening comments that he'd like to make regarding the budget. So I'd like to turn it over to Gene at this time.
Great. Thanks, Marla. Appreciate it. Just a few comments about our budget. I believe, Marla, this will be the 5th year that you have presented the Harbor Department budget. And we have come such a long way in this area thanks to Marla's leadership. When I started at the Harbor Department 6 years ago, we had a negative cash flow budgeted of $188 million. When we were fortunate enough to have Marla join us in February of that next year, we were able to slice into that within 18 months, and we've been running positive cash flow ever since. Now, that's only one item, but one I look at very closely, yet there's a litany of other items that Marla works so diligently on, and the team that she has put together to be able to lead this has been extraordinary. Now, we do face tough times, and what we're coming up against right now mainly is underscored by uncertainty. We really don't know how quickly the American consumer can get back out to the stores, the restaurants, and buying patterns that would resemble anything close to what we had witnessed over the last decade. And as you know, 70% of our country's GDP is reliant on you and me going out and shopping, dining, and otherwise buying consumer goods. We've also seen this in our industry, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, with the blank sailings, with an unevenness of supply and demand, the capacity of these big ocean-going ships in doubt almost every day. But we are keeping our finger on the pulse of this industry, and not just the international front, but here domestically as well. While about 75 to 80% of our revenue is driven by the shipping industry, we also have an appreciable retail, dining, and entertainment marketplace that we subscribe to and partner with every day here in the Harbor District. So this is very complex, very uncertain times. But I have, again, all the admiration of the world for Marla and her team and the way she continues to guide us through not just the good years when we're growing so fast, but also in the difficult times as we set up to really put our feet in the ground, make sure that we're very stable. But it has been those strong financial policies that we've had in place under Marla's direction with the great support of this board and Mayor Garcetti that will get us through these difficult times. We will be able to continue to push through on projects, as we talked about, not only for the waterfront, but from an infrastructure standpoint, including digital infrastructure. And that's only made possible because of what we've done so far under Marla's leadership. So with those opening comments, may I please turn it over to Marla to begin the fiscal year 2021 budget presentation.
Thank you, Gene, for that vote of confidence. It's greatly appreciated. So, Commissioners, I'm pleased to present the fiscal year budget for 2021 for your consideration and adoption. I'm going to move to share my screen so that you can see the slides. Okay. 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 So for today's focus, I'd like to talk a little bit about the budget development process. We gave you a deep dive of the budget at the April 16th board meeting earlier this year. And we've made some changes to the budget since then. So I'd like to walk you through those changes. Given the uncertainty regarding around the economy that Gene referenced just a few minutes ago, we decided to take a more conservative approach towards the budget, which we hinted at when we presented several different scenarios during the budget process at that meeting in April. So we'll walk you through what those changes are. And very simply, we're going to just talk about the sources of funding for our budget and also the appropriations. So basically, where our money comes from and how we intend on spending it. So insofar as the budget development process, we just wanted to highlight the operating budget for the department, the roughly $278 million, and how it aligns with the department's strategic plan. This pie chart that is before you shows how our operating budget aligns with the 4 core tenets of the Port's strategic plan. We basically took every line item in the budget and assigned it to one of the 4 tenets. As you can see, just over half of our budget goes to support a secure, efficient, and environmentally sustainable supply chain. So this would include expenditures and salaries and benefit costs in our environmental division, as well as our port police and other functions here at the department. A quarter of the operating budget goes to support world-class infrastructure that supports growth. So this would be expenses related to our construction and engineering division. Roughly 14% goes to support strong relationships with our stakeholders, and approximately 8% goes to support the improved financial performance of port assets. In putting together the budget, we strive to manage to certain financial performance goals that are indicative of a strong credit rating, prudent levels of leverage, liquidity, and profitability. Our AA credit rating, which is the highest given to any port in the nation without tax support, is key to helping to provide a base on which we provide the resources for the department to carry out its mission. So we currently have that AA rating, and we expect to maintain it for the foreseeable future. Our debt service coverage, which is basically the ratio of available revenues divided by our debt service, which is the principal and interest that we pay on our debt. Our legal mandate is 1.25 times coverage. We have an internal policy of 2 times coverage, and we expect to be at well over 3 times coverage. Our operating margin, which we have a target of 45%, which is our operating income divided by total revenues. We are not expecting to meet that with this adopted budget that's before you. We're about 5.5 percentage points under that, and it's largely due to the decreased revenue that we expect in the coming year due to the decline in TEUs, and we'll talk more about that later. This is an internal standard. It's not something that we are obligated to maintain for our bondholders or for our credit rating. It's just something that we do for internal discipline. However, we plan to manage to get as close to the 45% as we possibly can during the fiscal year. Okay. So this, in summary, is our budget. On the left-hand side in blue, you can see the overall resources that we have to support the department. The first 3 line items of operating receipts, non-operating receipts, and capital grants are money that's coming into the department. And we'll talk more about those in more detail in subsequent slides. The available cash that we have, both restricted and unrestricted funds, are money that we currently have already. So in combining that together, it's all, in total, it's $1.5 billion. And on the right-hand side in orange, you'll see the appropriations where the money is going out. So it's operating expenses, non-operating expenses, paying off our debt, and then once again, where we expect our cash balances to be at the end of the year. So I wanted to spend the next 3 slides talking about the changes that we've made to the budget since the presentation in April. We have lowered our revenue estimates by $20 million for the upcoming year. What we came to you with in April was $481 million, and we're proposing for next year of $460 million. This is due to a lowering of the forecasted TEUs by roughly 7.7%. When we came to you in April, we had predicated the budget on 8.6 million TEUs, and now it is down to 7.9 million TEUs. None of us have a crystal ball, and as Jean mentioned, stated so well earlier before, there's just so much uncertainty. But we do think that this is a reasonably conservative approach. The reason why we focus so much on the TEU projections is because 75% of our revenue is derived from charges on TEUs. So just in terms of the approach that we took for the TEU assumptions, we're assuming that the first 7 months of fiscal year 21 is down, because that was on a relative basis to the prior fiscal year. That was the pre-pandemic period. For the next 3 months after that, we're assuming that it's flat to where we were. And then in the last 2 months of the fiscal year, we're assuming a recovery, an upward trend for the TEU volumes for the port. Okay. We were also able to make some significant reductions in our operating expenses relative to the budget that we presented to you in April. That budget was roughly $285 million. What we're presenting to you before you today is $278 million. So we've been able to reduce it by roughly $7 million or 2.4%. The bulk of those reductions came from reducing funds in the incentive program account, just assuming that TEUs were going to be down. We felt comfortable in making reductions there. Also making some refinements to the salaries and benefits amounts, and reducing line items such as travel. Just given the pandemic, we don't anticipate travel for department employees through the end of the year. And also marketing and public relations was reduced in anticipation of the fact that we've shuttered our visitor serving events for the port. And so we expect that to result in some cost reductions. And then finally, with respect to changes that we've made since the April presentation, we made some refinements to the capital improvement program budget. The budget we presented to you before was $192 million. And the one that we're presenting to you today is $164 roughly million, or $163.6 million. This chart basically shows how we got there by showing the reductions in the broader categories of the capital projects. I won't go through each and every single one of these, but I'll just describe the approach that we did. We've tried to determine where could we delete, delay, or reduce capital expenditures. And while we didn't find areas to completely delete projects, we did identify some areas where we could delay delay construction on less critical projects, namely 3 primary areas, the Pasha Wharf, the Starkist demolition, and the AMP facility for the Outer Cruise Terminal. All 3 of those projects resulted in a reduction of $12 million. We were also able to reduce our overall contingency for the capital plan by $2 million. And then the rest of the reductions of $29 million total came from refining some of the numbers based on new information as bids came in for projects, and also pushing out construction costs into outer lying years. And this is an overall view of our cash flow. Once we're taking into account the projected operating revenues of $460 million, and once operating expenses and debt service have been paid, we have roughly $103 million. And then looking at the column, or focusing it on the column in green, we have $103 million from which to fund our capital improvement plan, which is admittedly higher than it has been in the last couple of years. And so when it's all said and done, we do expect to have to utilize our reserves to the tune of $44 million. However, to the extent that operating revenues come in higher and or operating expenses come in lower, that number will decrease. And also historically, we usually spend about anywhere from 80 to 85% of our CIP. So that would also lower that negative number as well. So I'm not as concerned about that. We do not anticipate any borrowing in order to pay for the capital plan for the foreseeable future. Okay. Now to just jump into the sources of funding for the proposed budget. The $1.5 billion in financial resources that we have to meet our obligations are presented here. Won't go into too much detail as I've kind of referenced this before. We've got the $460 million in operating revenues. We also have $16 million in grant receipts coming from other governmental agencies to help support our capital projects. And we have roughly $870 million in reserves. That's all of the blue slices of the pie, if you will, that are before you. And just some detail on our operating revenues. As mentioned before, it's predicated on a 7.9 million TEUs next year. About roughly 80% or $368 million of our budget is derived from shipping services. This includes wharfage, dockage, demurrage, and pilotage fees. Rental of port property for largely industrial purposes, as well as marinas, constitutes about 15.5% of our revenues, or $72 million. And together, these two line items are 95% of our revenue. The remaining 5% come from proceeds from the Clean Truck Program, parking fees, film permits, and AMP reimbursements. And this slide is just intended to show our projected revenues. It's the same number, the 460 million, but by line of business. It provides a little bit more granularity than the previous slide. So you can see that roughly 74% of our revenue is coming from containers, and the percentage that's coming from auto, liquid bulk, dry bulk, cruise, etc. As you'll note, there's a significant decrease in cruise due to the global pandemic. Moving on to how our money is spent. So our projected appropriations for next year is balanced with the sources of funding at $1.5 billion. Then appropriation, just really simply put, is our authority to spend money for a specific purpose. And if we want to go beyond this, we have to come back to the board for approval. Okay. Our operating expenses is probably the most dynamic portion of our budget appropriations, coming in at $278 million. Our three largest line items of salaries and benefits, city services, and professional services comprise 88% of the budget. 55% of our budget goes to salaries and benefits for Harbor Department employees, so roughly over 900 employees that we have here in the department. 20% for city services, which includes reimbursement for services provided by the Los Angeles Fire Department, Recreation and Parks, and City Attorney's Office. And lastly, 13% for professional services. These are outside contractors that supplement the work of the Harbor Department. And this percentage is slightly lower than it had been in recent years. Moving on to our capital improvement program. So this pie chart just shows the relative proportions of how we view our capital plan, the 5 categories for terminals, transportation security, public access, maritime service, and maritime services and security. So about 37% or $61 million of our budget will go to support terminal projects. The big projects that we have in this area are for MOTEMs, the Marine Oil Terminal Engineering Standards, to fortify our liquid bulk terminals and to bring them into compliance with modern standards called for by the state, and also the Everport terminal. Our transportation is about 4.5% of our budget at $7 million, and this is for largely for rail projects and for roadway improvements to the port. Security includes funding to enhance the port police radio and dispatch system, and that's coming to about 5% of our budget, or $7.8 million. Public access funding is going to see a big increase this year, and this is for funding for projects related to support the San Pedro Public Market as well as the Wilmington waterfront. And lastly, maritime services is also seeing an increase this year of 20% of the budget, or $33 million. And this category is for facilities that support the operations of the Harbor Department. We're in the midst of a rehabilitation of the Harbor Administration Building, as well as purchasing 2 new boats for our port pilot service. The next slide shows where the adopted budget for the current year for the CIP was $144 million. We anticipate spending much less than that, about $75 million, and this is largely due to delays in some of our terminal projects. However, we do anticipate an increase of well over 100% for next year's CIP spending of $163 million. And this next slide is just intended to show the depth and breadth of the capital projects here at the port. Some of our larger projects planned for next year are Everport terminal enhancements. That project is continuing. The Wilmington waterfront modems, as discussed before, and the San Pedro public market. And these are projects that touch every corner of the port complex. And lastly, just a rather large expenditure item in our budget is for debt service. This is to repay the principal and interest on the $711 million in bonds that we have outstanding. Debt service next year will be $79 million, 45 of which will go to pay down principal and 34 million will be for interest. At the end of next year, we will have roughly $660 million in bonds outstanding. So I am available to take any questions that you may have about the budget, but before doing so, I'd like to give a tremendous thank you to our budget team and everyone who worked on this budget. Jeff Strafford, Flora Kaw, Giuliano, Joanna Liak, Melody Ugaldi, Art Delano, Tracy Vu, Matt Marchese, Evelyn Estrada, Kimberly Cruz, Sybil Snow, and Charles Lee. I can't thank them enough. They really make this port shine and make it look great. And as I mentioned before in April, everyone's been working from home because of the pandemic, and the process has been really seamless.
Thank you so much, Marla. If you could unshare your screen so that we could see everybody again, that would be great. I just want to echo that thanks to you and your team in this tremendous effort. I know that we get a preview and we see all the departments and we talk about all the numbers well in advance of the final budget presentation. However, given the circumstances of the last couple months, I have seen how everyone has worked tirelessly to update these numbers, to make last minute changes, to adjust our forecast and take the best, strongest, and most conservative approach to make sure that we are well prepared for the future at this port, and we can sustain all of our operations and make sure that we're providing the best customer support to all of our supply chain. So thank you for that. If any of the commissioners have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. Or Commissioner Prosy, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I was going to say on behalf of myself and even Commissioner Renwick and everyone, all the other commissioners, it's been a great job, Marla. We know we did a lot of scrubbing through the Capitol the last time we met. It was great conversation, and we spent a lot of time on it. So thank you so much for the team and all the detail you put together. And during the conversations we've had, we talked about, and I think it was chart 18 or 17. You talked about some items that were either reductions or lowered, or we sharpened the pencil. So one in particular, of course, I'll bring up is the LA waterfront. That was more of a pencil sharpening, correct? It wasn't a full reduction or not. I just wanted to clarify that one bullet there.
That's correct. Yes. We have, and I'll invite Tony to add to this, but we have had some delays in the projects because of just working with other city departments, or we had to rebid a key portion of the San Pedro public market, but those projects are back on track.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear, just to clarify that for the public, because sometimes when we go through the charts, it's not clear what was really a reduction or what was more of re-looking at what it may cost and just actually getting more closer to what we think the actuals will be. That's why I'm bringing that one up. So, Tony, I didn't know if you need to comment on that or not, but I think Marla may have clarified, but if you have any comments on that, it'd be great.
No, I think it's covered. We're basically committed to the our obligations and in delivering as fast as we can on these projects. So.
Yeah, and then lastly, again, just thank you for everything. This is probably my 6th or 7th one, and every time the detail and the presentations, the conversation get deeper and better each time. It's a lot of effort to keep it straight. The summary report's awesome. The presentation was easy to follow. And just thanks for all of your hard work, the team's hard work. You know, we as commissioners have a lot of questions. I always like to say sometimes it's easier to ask the question than it is to answer it. So again, just thank you again for all your work and the broader team there at the Harbor Department for this. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Middleton.
First, I really agree with the remarks by President Lee and Commissioner Perosi. An amazing job. I mean, to look at the scope of this budget and the way you have broken it down for us is terrific. And I want to because we spent so much time on the first draft, there aren't many more questions now. It really is just the changes. But I really wanted to thank Marla because this is only my second budget review. I still had a lot of questions, and I called her yesterday and particularly appreciated the explanation of page 4, that strategic plan and alignment, because it's a different way of presenting the same information. We know what the spending, we know what the line items were on expenditures, but what page 4 does, which since Anthony mentioned it, is good for people that review these documents, is how does what we're spending align with our strategic goals? And that's what chart 4 did in a really good way. Now, there was one question I had that we didn't cover yesterday, and that was on page 12. When you talked about proposed funding sources, and you talked about the Harbor Revenue Fund. Is that the same as the harbor maintenance? You know, that whole question of what we pay to Washington and what we get back. Is this the same thing, or what's the Harbor Revenue Fund?
No. So the harbor maintenance tax is an assessment that our tenants pay on boxes, and that money goes to Washington, and it's distributed to other ports throughout the country. The Harbor Revenue Fund is basically like our savings account here at the port.
Okay. Then with the harbor maintenance tax, it goes to Washington. Now, you said it's distributed to other ports. Is any of it distributed back to us?
We do.
Where does that show up, if at all, in the budget?
So yes, it is. It would fall under non-operating income, and I don't have the exact numbers of how much our tenants pay out. I believe it's well over $100 million every year, and we get back anywhere from $3 to $6 million a year. So in this year's budget, we've budgeted about $5 million for the harbor maintenance tax.
Okay, and I have, raised the issue, and Mr. Soroka assures me that we're working on that in terms of Jennifer Cohen, policy changes, and so on. But that's certainly a figure worth noting. So to make sure I understood, our tenants pay $100 million, and we get back 5% of that, meaning that the port gets it back for improvements.
If I may,
Dean
Marla,
I'm going to turn it over to him. Yes.
Commissioner Middleton, this is a very complex issue. And yes, I have assured you that staff and I are working on this, but staff who predates me have been working on this subject and the question of equity for more than a decade. I'll turn it over to David Libatique, who has some specifics, but the numbers are very large and the payments come from those who use the ports. David, take it over from here, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gene. David Libatique, Deputy Executive Director, Stakeholder Engagement. Commissioner, we have been working in Washington, D.C. to pursue reform for the harbor maintenance tax. As described, the harbor maintenance tax is an ad valorem tax that was created in 1986. It is assessed only on imported cargo into the United States at a rate of 0.0125% of the value of the imported goods. The Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach combined contribute roughly 30% of the entire national pot. And that is, the Port of LA alone is over $200 million actually per year that shippers pay So the actual importers pay into the national fund. That money is distributed in accordance with statute. There are limitations on how that money could be spent. These are in-water maintenance needs. The harbor maintenance tax was created to maintain the widths and depths of federal channels. We have long been a donor port, as the numbers indicate, and that is primarily because we're not a river port. And so we don't get the siltation that other ports like our competitors on the East Coast or the Gulf Coast experience. So we have been, for the past 10 years, pursuing reform to the harbor maintenance tax. There is legislation that has been introduced in the United States Senate Environment and Public Works by the minority staff that would achieve a fair allocation of funding. There was already a move in the first CARES bill that would facilitate full use of the harbor maintenance tax. Now we're trying to follow that up with reform to make sure that donor ports like LA, Long Beach, the Northwest Seaport Alliance, and other ports like Wainimi and San Diego get a fair share of that funding. Some of that means we need to pursue expanded uses of funding and a carve out of funding from annual harbor maintenance tax receipts.
Okay. Obviously, Mr. Soroka mentioned how complex it is. I'll defer other questions till this is either on the agenda or we have an opportunity to talk about it. But thank you for that answer. And then the last thing I would have for Marla is, again, we talked about page 13 and 14, and particularly page 13, operating revenues. I mean, I thought it was noteworthy because we've talked about the effect on decrease in cargo volume, that even though our cargo volume will be down and we forecast 7.9 million TEUs, the income that we're getting is actually going to increase by 3.6%. And I asked you how it was that the volumes were down and the income was up. And you explained that there has been a polar rate increase, and that's how we are managing not to be in far more negative territory financially, given the fact that TEUs are down. So if you have anything else to add, I think I stated what you said, but if I had said anything wrong, feel free to correct me. And again, thank you for your answers.
Okay, no, that's correct. While the overall volumes are going down, the revenue is expected to go up slightly because the rate per box coming from some of our terminals is expected to increase. And those increases are built into the arrangements or the permits that we have with those tenants.
Okay, thank you. Nothing more.
Commissioner Moreno-Linares.
Thank you. Thank you, Marla, and thank you to all of your team for your hard work on our finances and keeping us moving. Particularly, thank you for keeping the community investment in the mix and honoring the commitments that we have made to the community. I was wondering if, given the situation that we're living today, what has happened in these past few weeks, and then what's happened in this last week, and an awareness that's being brought to the front, and given the remarks that the mayor was making yesterday, and where he was asking all departments, he addressed the police department, but where everybody is going to have to make adjustments, including in their budget, so that money can be allocated differently, so that we can try to deal with some of the situations. I was just wondering if at the port, if we are changing anything, and that may not be part of the budget as much as maybe our strategic plan, but I know we have like a goal where contracts go out to minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, veterans. I know there's a goal and a target there. Mm-hmm. I just wonder if, given the times that we're living in right now, and even what we were saying earlier at the beginning of the meeting, the port, the size that it is, are we adding anything, increasing anything, changing anything to be part of the solution. I know we do good things. I'm just wondering where the room is or where the conversation is to do more.
Okay. To answer your question,
and I'm not sure if that's a Marla question.
Yeah, I'll start, and anyone else on the team can feel free to jump in to address it. As you're aware, as a proprietary department and as a fiduciary of the state of California, we have limits on how we can spend our money here at the port. But within that, and we have a strategic plan that guides how we spend our money as well. But we do strive every day to spend our money in a way that reflects the values of the broader community of the city of Los Angeles. So whether that's trying to be more inclusive and diverse in our contracting opportunities, as you made reference to, I know we don't necessarily call it this, but just being a good citizen, a good neighbor, a good community member. There are things that we've done to within the confines of the limitations, I see Jana, of the state Tidelands Trust. We're using port property for temporary housing for homeless shelters. We've been approached about using port property for COVID-19 testing. Ultimately, it wasn't needed, but it is something that we were looking at doing. So we have outreach with local schools. Unfortunately, our boat tour program for kids is on hold right now, but we look forward to resuming that once we're able to do that. And the various education outreach programs that we have to expose children in the local community to job opportunities in maritime and to the important work that's done here. So within the limits that we have imposed on us by the state or whatever else, we do have a budget that reflects the values of the city of Los Angeles and of the surrounding community as well. So, these are tight times. As you can see, we've made reductions to the budget, but we still plan on carrying out those commitments and those programs to the extent that we can.
So, and I'm familiar with the programs that you listed, and a lot of them have to do with support, helping others who are already doing something. I'm just wondering, and maybe it's in a report somewhere, I just haven't seen it. I'd be interested to know the percentage of ethnic, the breakdown of the people that work for the port.
Okay.
How we outreach when there's openings. And I realize who works at the port is a much smaller group than the overall group that, we don't have control over all those other people that get hired. But in the areas that we do have control, I just want to know, what are we doing? I know we have a goal. Maybe we're even overseeing that goal. Is that goal big enough? And how do we do that outreach so that small minority-owned firms, particularly African-American owned firms, if they exist out there, how do they find out? Where do we get the word out so that they are able to compete? Because I know that by the time we choose, you have to the right person in terms of can they do it, can at the right, what those efforts are, and then what those results are. Because I believe we've seen in a report, like with meeting that goal, but I don't know the breakdown. And maybe that's not something that's of interest to everybody, maybe just to me. I just want to know that we as an entity are doing our part, pushing ourselves a little or a lot to help increase those numbers. Because at the end of the day, the biggest culprit, besides the feelings inside of people, the opinions of people, but if we don't change the economic situation of things, of people, things will not, then they're not going to change. So just wondering. Thank you.
And that's some data that we can definitely provide you, the demographics of the department as well as by position as well, so that we can look at the advancement of people within the department as well by demographics. In terms of outreach for recruiting, for the last 4 or 5 years or so, we've been participating in a citywide program called Targeted Local Hire. which has been led by the City Council to provide job opportunities, good civil service full-time jobs to people who have traditionally faced barriers to employment, whether that's people who have been involved in the criminal justice system or homeless or veterans or in the foster care system. And we've made a number of hires through that program. But I'm proud to say that the Harbor Department has been doing that kind of outreach and work for over 20 years by working with the local worksource centers to bring in people through entry-level positions to the vocational worker program and to see people work their way up into good civil service, good paying city jobs. So that is something that we've been doing for a number of years here at the department, and we can provide you some information on that as well. In addition to our outreach that we do to small businesses, minority businesses, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses, we attend over, maybe not right now because of social distancing, but we attend over 70 events a year to reach out to different businesses in the community to provide opportunities.
Thank you, Marla. Thank you, Commissioner Moreno-Linares. I'm sure everybody on the board will echo those sentiments of how critical this look is at workforce composition. I'd also urge you to make sure you analyze and study any gender and pay gaps that may be occurring between any of the different groups of people who are working at the Harbor Department. I do commend the Port of Los Angeles for doing a great job in its intensive outreach into the neighboring cities surrounding the port for internships, for training, for career opportunities for everyone who's growing up in the surrounding area. But it is very, very important to be looking at those while also still understanding that there are, as a public agency, limitations on like classifications and preferences and things like that throughout our hiring practices. But we really appreciate that look, and a lot of that information is relatively public as well. But we look forward to hearing back and just making sure that one look at that information and that data is not good enough, because things change over the years. Mm-hmm. We want to be sure that we are continually holding a mirror up to ourselves to make sure that we're reflecting and walking the walk and all of our morals and objectives. We have a couple more questions. Commissioner Middleton.
I wanted to thank Commissioner Moreno-Linares for bringing us back to where we opened the meeting and talking about the larger picture, and particularly what's going to be done. I mentioned in a general sense the question that the main changes we need to make are economic, but Commissioner Moreno-Linares' question in the context of the budget brought us back to being more specific about that, which is job development. I really appreciate the fact that almost every time there's an opportunity, Mr. Soroka raises the question or makes the comment that we're about the business of creating jobs. We're about the business of providing work opportunities. When we talked about the budget and we talked about those community, the public access investment program, and that we weren't going to, because I raised it originally, were we going to have to cut the spending for either the San Pedro waterfront or the Wilmington project? And Commissioner Perosi correctly pointed out at that time that the reason we can't cut those is those are putting people to work. And we wanted to keep those in the budget. So in answer to your question, in addition to the community benefit of keeping our promise to the community and delivering and so on, that's also another aspect of job creation. So all those are good. I think it's we're well advised to keep our eyes on that prize, and I think staff's doing it. Thank you.
Commissioner Perosi.
Yeah, great conversation. I think that's where we all need to be in all elements of our lives is talking through this. The one thing I think I wanted to just add, I'm not going to take a lot of time, but we need to be focused a lot on diversity and inclusion. I think that is a critical element of all these programs that we have. There's training out there that is really focused on diversity and inclusion. We go through that at work. We have what we call business resource groups, where different groups are represented, and there's councils where all groups get together. I'm actually the executive of our Hispanic Employee Network. So it's something we need to think about as a Harbor Department, and then how does that expand through our programs and our training that we do with our young folks that we talk to in the community, and all these educational programs we have. I just think there's something there. So I know we're talking about the budget, but today's times, I think this is a great point to bring up. And for all of us to talk through and think about as we move forward with the funding we are going to have in front of us, how do we change or adapt to include conversations about diversity and inclusion in the things that we do. And I'll leave it at that for now, but there's a lot of information, training, awareness on that very discussion that we all need to be having more of. So that's the only comments I want to make. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes all questions from the commissioners regarding the budget. Hearing no further, may I please have a motion and a second?
Motion to approve.
Commissioner Middleton, Commissioner Moreno Linares. Amber, take it away.
Commissioner Perosi,
Yes.
Commissioner Moreno Linares,
Yes.
Commissioner Middleton,
Yes.
President Lee.
Yes.
Okay, the item passes. Moving on to our next item.
Thank you so much, Marla. Thank you, everybody in finance. Hoping to beat these numbers this year, though.
Yes.
V-shape recovery. Here we go.
Yeah, hopefully.
We have one last item on our open session agenda, number 9. Commissioners, one comment has been provided to the board office, which will be read into the record. For item 9, which is a resolution for a funding agreement between the City of Los Angeles Harbor Department and the South Coast Air Quality Management District to fund a technology advancement program project with Daimler Trucks North America, LLC. And I'll read that into the record when you're ready.
Yep.
Yes, okay.
Oh, sorry. Chris, can you go first?
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. Chris Cannon, Environmental Management Division. I will share my screen with you. I have a presentation. Okay, so we have today a technology advancement funding program for agreement for your consideration. Hold on, there we go. The agreement is just as background, we have our 2017 Clean Air Action Plan update includes a commitment to accelerate the adoption of zero-emission trucks. And so this project is proposed to be administered by the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and it involves Daimler Trucks North America, and it involves the development of battery electric zero-emission trucks for demonstration. There'll be 5 Class 6 trucks and 15 Class 8 trucks. At least 5 of the Class 8 trucks would operate in the San Pedro Bay. The proposed funding amount is for $1 million. The Port of Long Beach has already entered into agreement to do this. I thought I would show you just pictures of Class 6 and Class 8 trucks, just so you have an idea what they look like. The ones at the top are actually they're actually Daimler Class 6 trucks. So they're the exact trucks. Those are still pilot development trucks. They're still prototypes, but those are examples of what they look like. And then at the bottom is the Class 8 trucks. Those are the types that we're used to seeing for drayage. So those are the trucks, the actual trucks that would be developed. And as I indicated, most of them will be Class 8 trucks, but there will be those Class 6 trucks as well. So we wanted to just take a quick look at some details of truck emissions. We always try to, if we can, just provide some additional information for you and for the public. The first thing is to say, before I even talk about these, is there is no such thing as a zero emissions truck. It's a term that we all use. It refers to tailpipe emissions, which is very, very important. But the fact is there's always emissions associated with all heavy-duty equipment, and the zero-emission trucks have emissions that are associated that I'll describe in a moment. So first here is this is conventional diesel. A lot of people don't realize that 71% of the PM10 that's generated from a conventional diesel truck comes not from the engine, but from the tires and the brake wear. And about half of the PM 2.5 comes from the same place. The significance of that is that PM 10 and PM 2.5, that's the stuff that gets in your lungs and can contribute to asthma and other respiratory concerns. So it's interesting that that's where the PM10 and the particulate matter in general comes from those trucks. The engine produces the remaining particulate matter, the most notable of which is diesel particulate matter. That's the black soot that comes out of an engine and is carcinogen. And then, of course, NOx and SOx and all the other things that you're used to hearing about. For conventional natural gas, it's the same for the brake and tire wear. So most of the PM comes, but the natural gas trucks do not generate diesel particulate matter, which is a good thing. Obviously, that's the stuff that, as I said, it's a carcinogen, but they are thought to generate ultrafine particles. That's still being studied. Ultrafine particles are much, much smaller than PM 2.5. They're very, very tiny. And the concern is that they can actually get not only into your nostrils and your bloods, but they're so small that they can actually get into your individual cells. And so they can disrupt cell function and they have a potentially adverse effect. So that's something that is still being studied with natural gas trucks. The good news about ultrafines is that they dissipate very, very quickly once they get out of an engine. They essentially, what happens is they all come together and form larger particles. So you have to be near the engines to get hit with the ultrafines if indeed they occur. But that's still under study. And of course, the engine produces all remaining particulate matter. For zero-emission trucks, and this is both the battery electric and hydrogen versions, again, same particulate matter magnitudes that I described. No tailpipe emissions from these zero-emission trucks as I described. So that's no diesel particulate matter, NOx, SOx, or CO2. And CO2 is really important because the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our emissions inventory is not the ships, it's actually the trucks. So that's important, and that's one of the reasons that we're focused on zero emissions and the goals that we have. So leading to the advantages, all conventional combustion-based truck engines have tailpipe CO2. They'll all tell you they might have near zero, they might have reduced this or that, but they all have CO2. And that's the reason that you need to move towards zero emissions. Zero emission trucks do cause grid emissions or emissions from hydrogen creation. And when I say grid emissions, that's the creation of the electricity at power plants that's used to charge the trucks. There are emissions associated with that, and then the creation of the hydrogen, and there's even CO2 emissions associated with that. But the good news is that the emissions from the grid or hydrogen generation are a lot less than what you're getting from a conventional combustion truck emissions. So that's why it's better to move towards zero emissions, zero tailpipe emissions, whether it be hydrogen or battery electric. And that's why we've been pushing that. And it's a very important part of our clean truck program. So moving to the last slide, this is just a description of the way the money is being spent. As you can see, $1 million from the 2 ports, and then other monies from AQMD, and of course the majority of the money is coming from Daimler. So just to kind of finalize or to summarize, we ask that you approve the proposed agreement between the Harbor Department and South Coast Air Quality Management District. They would administer the project. They have committed to disclose. So the way it works is South Coast has a contract with Daimler. Daimler has subcontracts with the trucking companies that would actually test this equipment. AQMD has committed, we got confirmation from them today, to disclose the names of the trucking companies that will be testing the equipment when the grants are actually dispersed. I think Daimler is still trying to finalize those agreements. They did tell me that they're all going to be employee drivers. They know that much, but it will not, the names are still being, since the agreements are still being finalized, they'll announce that when the money is dispersed. They've also told me that they will do everything they can to make sure that the labor controls and requirements that are in all of their contracts, that's AQMD, I'm saying, will actually pass down through to Daimler's requirements, and that's a requirement to report any labor violations in the previous 3 years and have regular reports on this to the AQMD board. And then finally, we have our own requirements that you all are aware of. Any trucks that operate at the ports have to have concession agreements, and once they have concession agreements, every single month we check to make sure that if any of our concessionaires are on the labor board's bad list, they get a letter and they get a notification that they have to get off that list or they will jeopardize their ability to operate in the ports. So we will, our contribution, as I indicated, is $1 million allocated between the 2 fiscal years as indicated. And that is the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Amber, would you like to read the comment in before we take commissioner questions?
Yes, we have received one letter from Mike Munoz, the Senior Research and Policy Analyst for Our People, Our Port campaign at Lane. And the letter reads as follows. Dear President Lee and Commissioners, first we request that port staff disclose the names of the trucking companies who are testing the equipment being funded through this grant. The supporting document for this contract does not name the licensed motor carriers, the LMCs, who will be working with Daimler Trucking of North America to road test these zero emissions trucks. Past media reports have slated that one of the recipients, these heavily subsidized trucks and valuable charging infrastructure, is NFI. If this is the case, we understandably are concerned, as the sport has been made aware of many violations of labor, employment, and health and safety laws NFI subsidiaries over the years. In the future, we request that all such funding requests brought to the Board of Harbor Commissioners disclose the drayage partners who are slated to receive public administrated funds for trucks or infrastructure. Second, we want to underscore a related concern, which we raised in a public comment at the last board meeting on May 20th, and feel that we have been misunderstood based on comments in response. We want to reiterate our call to Port of Los Angeles to include labor protections in all incentives they distribute to trucking industries to ensure that past consequences are not repeated. To be clear, we fully understand that the grant before you today is managed by South Coast Air Quality Management District, who has taken the bold step to include labor protections in their grant-making process. Item 14 of Contract 19190 between SCAQMD, EPA, POLA, and POLB clearly states the labor protections in this contract. So there's no confusion. We are not asking this board to alter this agreement to include labor protections, as we understand the AQMD has already taken that critical step. We are asking that you ensure that the AQMD language be incorporated into all future funds or incentives the Port of Los Angeles administers directly or indirectly to trucking companies for the purchase of clean trucks and constructions related to infrastructure such as charging or fueling stations. Thank you, Mike Munoz.
Thank you. Questions from the commissioners? I feel like those are sobering stats on the tire and brake pads. So who is working on the zero emissions hoverboard for moving containers? Hopefully somebody will get started on that soon. I was watching this space.
Capacitor, that's what it's going to be.
Yeah. The beam me up, Scotty, or the disintegrate everything and make it reappear in our homes. Hopefully, I was watching the SpaceX launch and just thinking already when my kids are grown, they're going to look at that and be like, look at those antiquated touch screens and that old boxy Tesla. Commissioner Middleton and then Commissioner Moreno Linares.
Okay. Mr. Cannon, thank you for providing pictures for those of us who are mechanically challenged. Let's go to that picture of the trucks. And in terms of the difference between the Class 6 and the Class 8, you pointed out that the Class 8 is what we typically think of as the UTR. Now, I look at the Class 8 and I think, okay, what's being produced is the truck cab. And then there's a chassis that's hooked onto it and a container that's put on the chassis. Correct? That's the Class 8?
Yes, that's right. And just to clarify, and I can pull that picture up if you would like me to do it again, but pardon me?
I have it right here.
Okay, so there is a difference between a UTR and a Class 8 truck. A UTR is an off-road vehicle, and a Class 8 truck is an on-road vehicle. And the differences are actually things that you can kind of see in the picture, like rear, they have to have specialized types of mirrors. They have to have a license plate. They have to have other kinds of brake lights and things like that. They're a little different than that they have on UTRs. They have those things on UTRs, but they're just not quite certified in the same way by Department of Transportation for on-road use. So that is what the difference is. You can buy a UTR that has on-road certification. We actually have some UTRs operate at the port here that do that because they have to cross over a public road. And then once they cross over the public road, the police are waiting for you. And so you have to be certified or else you get a ticket. So that's the difference. The other way you can look at a Class 8 truck is if you look at the pictures that I showed you, if you look at there's the wheel that's in the front on the bottom there, and then you see the two wheels that are toward the back of the chassis right where the container is. Those two axles are what makes the difference between a Class 8 truck versus Class 7 and others. The additional axle, the 2, is what provides additional support for that container because the container can be very heavy. So that's what makes a Class 8 truck versus the other types that don't have that. The Class 6 trucks are, as you see, more like box trucks, but they're not like the ones that show up at your house to deliver FedEx, although they can be. These are typically heavier. The ones you see at your house are Class 5 or even Class 4. These are pretty big ones, and they usually move things around in the region. They're just not quite as big and contain as much or can support as much weight as a Class 8 truck. Did that answer your question? I probably said more than you wanted me to say.
No, that leads into, and it's the need for several other questions. But while we're on it, because I suspect we're going to be talking about this a lot. So what I call the UTR is that, and of course that's the one that has the space for the fifth wheel in the back and so on. Is that called a Class 7?
No, it's the reference to classes is a reference to on-road equipment.
Got it.
On-road equipment has different classifications altogether. So Class 8, Class 7, Class 6, all that refers to on-road equipment.
Then let's go back to the pictures you gave us of the Class 6 and the Class 8.
Sure, I can share my screen again if that's all right.
Nah, I don't think we even need it. Okay, in the Class 6, what I'm calling the cab in the front, is that all one unit, the driving part and the carrying part? In other words, not an attachment.
No, that's right. It's all one truck. That's
Got
right.
it. And
whereas the Class 8, as you can see on the left, it's just the chassis by itself, and then on the right, it's the chassis with the container, or the pictures.
Got it. Okay, and then you started to answer. Here's the other questions I have. So now turning your attention to the report you gave us, not the presentation. On page 1, you said it's a project to demonstrate 20 electric on-road trucks. Now, again, I want to be sure I understand the differences and the correct nomenclature. Okay, if there's on-road trucks, but that's different than a long-haul truck. Because as I understood it, what the problem is with a long-haul truck is the battery's so large that you can't really haul anything in the truck. So when we say on-road, do you mean trucks that are able to go outside the terminal but are not necessarily long-haul trucks?
Yes, with an explanation. Gene always makes the comment that you can haul batteries or you can haul cargo, but you can't haul both. And the reason he says that is because in order to go long distances on a battery electric truck, you need a lot of range and you need a lot of battery power. And the batteries at this time, battery technology is such that you don't really get much range from a battery electric truck. But conceptually, any Class 8 truck that can operate on public roads can go anywhere if it has the range to do it. So it can go all the way to central part of the United States, to Chicago, anywhere, if it has the range to do it. The battery electric trucks at this time do not have that range, and so they would have to find plugging infrastructure every 100 miles all the way to Chicago, which obviously is not good. So you at this time, What we refer to when we talk about on-road trucks is a truck that can travel on the public roads, on the public highways, and it can go anywhere, subject only to the limitations of its range.
Got it. Now, again, just to understand the terminology, am I correct? When you use the word, or when we use the word drayage, does drayage necessarily mean only within the terminal, or can drayage mean on public roads?
Drayage means on public roads. It's basically a definition, again, in the terminal, those are UTRs. Outside the terminal are what they refer to as drayage trucks. And drayage trucks it's a term that is used to refer to movement from a terminal or from, it's basically short haul within a region. They're considered regional trucks. Drayage trucks are not considered, as you referred to it, long haul trucks, but they can be. It's just a term that refers to the movement of cargo to and from terminals on the roads. I think it's used to apply to a lot of different types, but if you look it up in the dictionary, it'll say short haul and regional. That's what it will say.
Okay, last question. Because I so much appreciate all the work that all the Harbor Department staff does, I save it so I don't have to ask the same thing twice.
Good, thank you.
Show you something you gave us, which is the overview of technology demonstration projects.
Okay.
Is this particular TAP agreement included in here?
Yes,
because I looked at it and I tried to think, okay, so what category is it? Because, it's obviously
this particular one. No, this particular one isn't, but this type of project is, and we referred to these types of projects that are their technology advancement program projects, but this particular one is brand new, so it will be added once we update that report.
Okay, and I said that was the last thing, but I lied. There's always one more thing.
All right.
Okay, and the other thing is, again, I just want to be sure we note, because this issue of clean truck applications is really in the forefront of a lot of our discussions. On page 2, your report clearly says, and again, I understand you put things in here because you mean what you say. At the bottom of the page, it says it's prototypes, not commercial ready. So if anybody was to see this and say, aha, you have the trucks, you could be using them, wrong. The reason it's called a demonstration project is because it's not ready for use by the general trucking public, correct?
That's right.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Prosy? Okay. Commissioner Moreno-Linares, you're good?
Yes, I just had a question, and you alluded to it the last time at the last meeting, Chris. The trucking companies that make it onto the state's list, and then we're checking on that monthly, and they get a letter from us. Just wondering if, off the top of your head, how many companies received a letter in the last 6 months, and if you know, and how many of them have gotten themselves off of that list because they've corrected their problem?
I think that they were, there's only one that's gotten to the point where they have they've been told that they may have to be, I think we sent, let me think this back. I think we sent letters to about 4 companies, but they quickly got their names off the list. But there was one that was not off the list, and that one is still being addressed, and they may very well lose their privileges to operate at the port.
So have they been on this list 1 month or 6 months or longer?
Been about 6 months. We try to give them time to cure and opportunities to get off of the list, but their time is up.
Okay.
Great. If there are no further questions, would anyone like to move this item?
So moved.
Second.
Moreno-Linares, Perosi, Amber?
Commissioner Perosi,
Yes.
Commissioner Moreno Linares,
Yes.
Commissioner Middleton,
Yes.
President Lee.
Yes.
The item passes.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
We will now move into closed session. Prior to going into closed session, I want to indicate that items number 1 and 2 on the agenda will not be discussed. Number 6, Commissioner Perosi is recused and he will not participate in that discussion. So with that, I move into closed session.
Thank you.
Okay, so the board completed its closed session discussion. As a report out, items 1 and 2 were not discussed at today's closed session. Item number 3, the board agreed to a settlement in the case listed, and we are the final signatory to this settlement, and so we will be settling this case in full, and the settlement documents will be signed. Item number 6, Commissioner Perosi is recused. He was not in the room for that item, and all other items were discussed, and yet we took no reportable action. That would conclude closed session for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana, and thank you, Jean. I am pleased to adjourn this meeting at 12:13 p.m. Thank you, everybody.